We want to start this session 15 right away. May I request Jaya, Jaitley and Sohail Seth to come up to the dais, please, and start the session. I think neither Mrs. Jaya, Jaitley or Sohail Seth needs an introduction. We all know them. So I'm waiting for Sohail to come. Please come. Please come.
Do we sit down first?
Please, please sit down. Welcome to you, Mrs. Jaitley. Please take your seat. Where is Mr. Seth? Sohail Seth? The topic is the craft of consumerism. So I suppose till we wait for him, can we start? Can you start and he will join you? It's a half an hour session between the two of you. Sorry? You can. Where is Sohail? Can someone find out? Where is he? Has he come? I can't see him. Anil, is Mr. Seth here? He's not there? Huh? I think we start with you because maybe 10, 15 minutes, so if he comes, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's the last of a long day. Also for inviting me. When I got this invitation and I was told that it was going to be on the craft of consumerism, I was wondering, I'm supposed to be with craft, but instead of craft and consumerism, it's of, which actually made it much more interesting. Because craft is something that you manipulate materials, you fashion something, you tweak something and create something. Hopefully something that you want to use. And consumerism is actually the rather ugly form of product production, marketing and buying that has happened because certain people have tweaked the situation in a pretty ugly manner. And what I'm going to say is going to demonstrate that. But I'll start with crafts. When the potter's wife or a couple in a home long thousands of years ago used clay to make pots to use for their own household use. The men, of course, went off to hunt and the women got the mud, fashioned the pots, and they used whatever they needed. They produced what they needed for themselves. Then the potter's wheel was discovered, first form of mechanization. And when the potter's wheel was discovered, they found that they could make few pots for themselves and they had a whole lot left which they then had to do something with. So the man went out into the marketplace. And that's the time when economic relations and gender started changing, where the woman had control in production, the man had control of marketing, and therefore the control of money. He kept the money and put the woman down, and that's how, even till today, it's very interesting, the woman has become a supplementary person in the creation of pots, because we've even got this theory that, in India particularly, that women should not touch a potter's wheel. It's inauspicious. So the potter will move the wheel, and the women will do the supplementary work of collecting the mud and maybe fashioning or decorating the pots, but the man still is in control of that money. And that's how the economic power of marketing, I think, first started. From that, I take you to industrialization. Industrialization came to India, particularly into the craft sector, when mechanization started in the mills of Lancaster and Manchester. And when you look at what happened to the handloom weavers during colonization, there are terrible, terrible stories of the dire straits they were in. During the Vijayanagar Empire and other times, our weavers actually formed guilds. They used to give money to the state for certain activities. They used to be the money lenders. They used to have their own banks. And from that, it was Will Durant who wrote The History of Civilization. He traveled to India at that time, and he wrote a very interesting booklet which talks about the miserable condition of the handloom weavers in India. And he says, I'm not part of any party, I'm not part of any movement, but I am today declaring myself a volunteer in fighting against the kind of exploitation and oppression that these people are undergoing in India. The greatness of our handloom weavers and their skills was completely ruined by the interests of the marketplace of the cloth that came out from the mechanization in Lancashire and Manchester. And what the British did to us then was not only to destroy our industry and our employment, the home cottage industry, but to completely start this whole trend of controlling of capital. This controlling of capital ruined the whole system of barter that we had in our village marketplaces. People used to come with something that they produced, bought it from a person who produced something else, and they exchanged. There was a mutual system of help and sharing that also got destroyed when somebody who controlled capital very far away was interested in promoting their products. When I first thought of the idea and pushed the government to set up this place called Delhi Haat, the marketplace which you might have heard of, Atal Bihari Vajpayee was then leader of the opposition, and he came to inaugurate it. And he made a very interesting speech, and in his usual manner, with his eyes half shut and his fingers up in the air, he said, crafts bahut acha hai, lekin craftiness nahi honi chahiye. And I thought at that time it was just a play on words and he was having fun. But when you look at what's happened, it is exactly this difference between crafting something and the craftiness of what happens in the marketplace that becomes really significant. And today, when I was preparing to come and be here, I realized what exactly he meant out of this. If you look back 100 years, what did we have? We had oil lamps, gas lamps, we had horse and carriage, bullock carts, and in 100 years now today, we have refrigerators, electronics, these ovens, you have hair curlers, you have electric toothbrushes, you have computers, mobile phones. The whole world is flooded with products that everybody needs to buy, and very significantly, we're talking about power generation. All these things pretty much need power. We talk about computers in every home and every village, but the village has to be electrified first. And then today we talk about computers and telephones. Yesterday, the former election commissioner said something about freebies and how he thought it was not such a bad idea. But I suppose many of you have heard the government's latest announcement that before the next elections, they are going to actually distribute mobile phones to all the poor in the country. I was very surprised at this, and I looked up the figures, and I found that actually by 2009, we already have 93 million or more mobile phones in the country. 75% of our population have mobile phones. It's in Indonesia, Brazil, Russia, certain places like that, where there is 100% saturation. Are we trying to reach that? Mobile phones for everybody, where people still want electricity, roads, water, education, a roof above their head. And those mobile phones are for what? For SMS messages. We've all seen what's happened with the SMS messages recently with the Assam problem. And nobody has gone into the study of how much a mobile phone can harm people. There is already a lot of study being done on how a mobile phone can actually harm, get cancerous tumors, all kinds of health problems which are still not clear in their studies and in their findings. And it is therefore still necessary to find out. And here we are giving freebies, mobile phones. Who does it benefit becomes the question. And that is where we see that it's the producers of those mobile phones. They've suddenly found that they can tap governments and say, here, this is a wonderful thing for your election. Give everybody a mobile phone and send them a message to vote for you. What happens after the election? Who pays those bills? And when we already have people, 75% of our population, who can buy those mobile phones themselves and are doing so, should we be spoon-feeding them with mobile phones? It's a form of disempowering people to give them something when they can get it already for themselves. So from this industrialization came the time of the assembly line, and you all remember Charlie Chaplin's film, Hard Times, where they talk about this terrible drudgery of working in a machine and doing the same work all the time. And because of that, in the early 1930s in the US, a very interesting thing happened. The Kellogg's company, who makes our good old cornflakes, they actually formed a very interesting vision of an alternate form of production, because they found that with the machines they had, they could already, in a 3-day week, provide what people wanted. So actually the rest of the time, those products were redundant, the machines could go still, and the people could actually go and do something else because they already had what they needed. So the Kellogg vision actually was very influential at that time among certain people, and particularly the working class. They said, we do 3 shifts of 8 hours. We're going to now do 4 shifts of 6 hours. And we can thereby, by lowering a little bit people's wages, we can employ 300 more people, and our workers can actually go home 2 hours earlier and do what the American Constitution wanted, which was to allow people the pursuit of happiness. They could go and garden. An 80-year-old woman started learning table tennis and became a champion. Somebody else went to educate themselves in another subject. They could play with their children and actually enjoy life. And then an interesting thing happened as a counter. Because when you start working less, you produce less, unless it's something really necessary. The association, the National Association of Manufacturers got together to counter this. It's a very interesting history, because they got together and they formulated this idea that actually people must be kept at work to keep our machines working, and our machines will produce those products, and our campaign has to be to keep every customer dissatisfied. It didn't mean that you had to have a bad product which you had to complain about, but it meant that the more you bought, the more you were not happy. You had to buy more. Now here comes this craft of consumerism, how these people manipulated people's minds to the extent that they actually made this a part of American government policy. The policy became political. And what was the political language which we still use today and are victims of is that free enterprise, which means produce from wherever you want, in however manner you want, but produce. Free enterprise is the same as free speech, free expression, and every other kind of democratic freedom. So democracy became associated with capitalism. And this is something which, when we look at Myanmar, all the countries that were clamoring for democracy, it was always the corporate sector, the multinationals that want to come in to mine the rubies, mine the oil, extract the oil. It became that democracy meant you had to bring all these people in to encroach and violate the environment for their own profit. And what happened with that? This became official policy that profit is fine, profit is necessary. So the whole campaign of advertising and all these other people that came up, they created a situation where you had your entire middle class in the US and across the world being made to buy things they didn't need. And who does these things, people who made them? People in the third world, people in China, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, in sweatshops, working 3-hour shifts of 12 hours at a time, not ever seeing daylight, no unionization. The same situation happens in China. So you have people buying what they don't need, being made by people who have to work in those conditions to buy the things that they desperately need. What kind of a work ethic is this? Is something that we have to ask in this whole process that we've got into of not being able to get off that treadmill of consumerism. And what else happens in this kind of situation? Look at the fallout. There's a very interesting book called Overdressed, written by a young woman called Elizabeth Klein, who suddenly discovered one day that she had come back from a sale buying 7 pairs of shoes in different colors. And why did she buy them? Because they were marked down from $15 to $7. And then she suddenly realized, what the hell am I doing? Why do I need these 7 shoes? You look at the T-shirts that are sold all over the world today. A typical buy, something you casually buy wherever you go. The T-shirt is made in either factories in Taiwan or China or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or even in Tirupur in India. Those T-shirts cost exactly the same to produce, but it's the label on them that matters. You have a Calvin Klein or somebody label, a Nike label, and suddenly the whole thing goes up to 1,000 rupees a T-shirt. But if you have some crude message printed on it, it doesn't cost a different amount to put that message on, but that can be sold in Lajpat Nagar or Sarojini Nagar or on the pavements or at beaches for nothing much at all. So the whole idea of logo and branding and label and the importance of that and the individualism that came with it, that if you had something, nobody else must. So when you go to a sale, you grab something for yourself, you don't let anybody else who needs it take it. So you had individualism, you had mindless buying. You have, even today, I'm sure all of you get on in your spam mail. Every day I get somebody saying Richie Feel or Shop Mania or Snap Deals offering me diamonds and wristwatches at cut down prices. The kind of things I just don't ever want. But they're pushing it through the internet and through everything else, not remembering at all the sweatshops that are actually producing this to create the biggest profit. Talking about profit, Walmart is desperately trying to come into India, and we're trying to talk about FDI in retail, and some governments are saying no, and the central government is desperate to get them in. With all the recession in the West, Walmart last year announced a profit of 5.6%, which was $4 billion. And what does the CEO of Walmart take home? $30 million is his salary. His salary in 1 hour is more than the collective salary of his employees in 1 year. Now, what does that actually mean? Is that the kind of disparity we are talking about? And then we talk about inclusive growth in India, but we are allowing people to come in and make profits like that off the backs of people who have to slog without any form of human rights or trade union rights at all. So the craft of consumerism is actually a very ugly situation, which we all have to seriously think about and know how each one of us are going to deal with. There are, of course, different kinds of voices that have come out, and of course Gandhiji is always mentioned. We should have as much as we want for our need and not greed, and everybody likes to say that. But after Gandhi came Schumacher, who talked about small is beautiful. We have a very interesting article which you might like to read. It's on the net, called The Gospel of Consumerism or Consumption by a person called Jeffrey Kaplan. And then I don't know how many of you know of a Michael J. Sandel. He teaches at Columbia University. And these are voices, like the many voices we've had in this conference here, talking about differences, talking about alternatives, talking about the problems more than the solutions, but some are coming up with some kinds of solutions. And Sandel is a person who has an audience, about 1,000 students or more sign up for his lectures at Columbia. In New York City, the heart of the great American dream of free enterprise. He goes to China and he's published this book called Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do? And about more than 1 million copies have sold in China alone. He's very popular in Asia. In India, we hardly find his book anywhere. But he has this very interesting way of teaching. He teaches all different forms of philosophy of the marketplace, political science. But he marches into his class and he says, if there's a snowstorm, should the price of snow shovels be less or more? And then somebody says, well, they should be more because then you can earn more because people need those shovels, so they'll pay for it. And then you can invest that into making more snow shovels so more people will benefit. And the other thing, of course, the other voice says, no, it is immoral to exploit people in difficulty. So actually the price of snow shovels should go down. So basically the issue becomes one of morality. What's the right thing to do? What is the morality of the marketplace? We've been constantly told since 1990 that there is no morality. There is no morality in technology, there is no morality in the marketplace. Both are as we choose to use them. You can use or misuse them. At my Delhi Haat, we try to use this whole idea of consumerism, production, marketing, and selling. In just 2 weeks of 180 small producers in a bazaar that we organized early this year, in the midst of all this inflation and recession everywhere, 180 small producers traveling from their homes, financing themselves, sold in 2 weeks. We did a total turnover of 9 crore. Now that's a huge amount, which actually goes into people's pockets to educate their daughters, get their son married, change the roof of their house, buy a new cow, and actually have a life worth living. And we do want those customers there, we do want them to buy, but we do it by showing them what the work involves, what the skill involves, what the processes of production are, and where we should not bargain. We are happy to go and buy a branded product in a mall, a lipstick for 900 rupees. But if we see a silk shawl embroidered by somebody over months, we will still bargain with them to get it down from 800 rupees to 400 rupees. And they're both disrespecting each other because the producer knows that the customer is going to bargain, so they will raise the price. And the customer feels that this fellow is sitting on the pavement. The handicraft on the pavement is undervalued. So something that is of value is undervalued, and something of no value at all gets a high value because of the craft of manipulating the marketplace. And in a place where we are discussing here regulation and power, I think this power of manipulating minds and creating mindless consumerism is something that we ourselves can regulate by regulating our own selves. We ask ourselves the question, do we really need it? And the second thing we'll ask, who is going to benefit from this? I think if each one of us does that before we open our wallet to buy anything, it will create some kind of a counter that Gandhi, Schumacher, all these people talk about, where people don't enjoy life at one end, where you get $30 million as a salary, and another person has to sit on the pavement to watch people throw coins at them to have their next meal. So that's the thought for all of you, and thank you for listening to me.